The Alamo. It's got to be one of the most famous last stands in history, right? A story of doomed heroes, incredible sacrifice, and that defiant cry for liberty. It's become a cornerstone of American legend. But like with all legends, the story we think we know is often just the beginning.
And this phrase, remember the Alamo, I mean, wow, it's so much more than just a line from a movie, isn't it? It's one of the most powerful battle cries in military history. For almost 200 years, it has stood for courage in the face of just impossible odds.
But here's the thing. Behind that legend, there's a way more complex and honestly a more fascinating reality. It's a story not just about heroism, but about huge political clashes, competing ambitions, and some pretty controversial motivations that all came to a head in 1836. So, what really happened at that dusty old mission in San Antonio?
For a lot of us, when we picture the Alamo, it probably comes straight from Hollywood. We see Davy Crockett, maybe it's John Wayne, swinging his rifle like a club, this larger-than-life folk hero making his final stand. It's a really powerful image, and it's one that has shaped this legend for decades.
And look, that cinematic version, it's super compelling. I get it. But the historical record, well, it tells a story that's so much richer. And let's be real, a lot more complicated. To really get what the battle was about, we've got to rewind and look at the pressures that were building in Texas long before the first shot was ever fired.
All right, so let's set the scene. Back in the early 1830s, Texas wasn't part of the United States. It was a northern territory of Mexico, but it was a region on edge, filled with American settlers whose culture and, maybe more importantly, whose economic interests were on a direct collision course with the Mexican government.
At its heart, the conflict was political. You can almost think of it like a states' rights versus a big central government debate. The American settlers, or Texians as they were called, were drawn to Texas by Mexico's old constitution, which gave them a lot of local control. But then, President General Antonio Lopez de Santa Anna came in and just tore up that constitution. Suddenly, all the power was being concentrated hundreds of miles away in Mexico City.
And this power shift, it wasn't just some abstract political thing. No, it came with policies that hit the settlers right where it hurt, their economic interests. And we've got to be really upfront about one of the biggest drivers here, slavery. Mexico had abolished slavery, but the American settlers, mostly from the South, kept bringing enslaved people with them. When the central government moved to enforce that ban, it became a major point of conflict. Throw in new immigration restrictions and higher taxes, and you've got a powder keg just waiting to explode.
Now, try to see it from Santa Anna's side for a second. To him, this wasn't just some local rebellion. He saw it as an invasion by foreign pirates. He even pushed through a decree saying that any foreigner caught fighting on Mexican soil would be treated like a pirate and executed. This wasn't going to be a normal war with prisoners. For the men gathering to fight him, the stakes were now literally life or death.
Okay, so that brings us to the Alamo itself. And it wasn't this amazing fortress you might picture. It was a crumbling old Spanish mission. In fact, Santa Anna himself called it an irregular fortification hardly worthy of the name. But this is where fewer than 200 defenders, a mix of American volunteers and local Tejanos, decided they were going to make their stand.
So the siege kicks off on February 23rd. Santa Anna's army rolls in and hoists this blood-red flag over the city. The message couldn't have been clearer. No quarter. Basically, we're taking no prisoners. Inside, things were already tough. The famous knife fighter Jim Bowie got terribly sick, leaving a 26-year-old lawyer, William B. Travis, in charge. A tiny group of reinforcements managed to sneak in, but outside, the Mexican army was just getting bigger and bigger every day. Hope was fading, and fast. And this letter from Travis, wow, it just perfectly captures the mindset inside those walls, doesn't it? He's writing this desperate plea for help addressed to the people of Texas and all Americans in the world. He knows the odds are impossible, but his message is just pure defiance. There would be no surrender. It was victory or death.
So, as the days ticked by, Santa Anna started getting antsy. His top officers were telling him, hey, let's just wait for the big cannons to get here. We can knock down the walls easily. But Santa Anna? Nope. He wanted a swift, decisive, and glorious victory. And he wanted it now. He ordered a massive, pre-dawn assault for March 6th.
And the numbers, they just tell the whole story, don't they? While the exact figures are still debated, we're talking about a force that outnumbered the defenders by at least 10 to 1. It was just overwhelming.
And you might think, okay, just a big chaotic attack, but no. Santa Anna had a really sophisticated plan. It was a four-pronged assault, with 4 different columns hitting 4 different spots all at the same time. The idea was to completely overwhelm them, make it impossible to concentrate their fire anywhere. So in the pitch black of early morning, the attack starts. And at first, the defenders they're ready. They unleash everything they have, cannons, rifles, and they actually push back the first attack, and then the second. But the sheer number of soldiers, it was just too much. On the third try, they swarmed over the walls. The fight moved into the open plaza, and then finally into the buildings themselves in this desperate hand-to-hand struggle.
And once the walls were breached, the fight became this series of horrible personal struggles. This quote from a man named Alamo Dickinson to his wife Susanna, who is hiding in the chapel, it just hits you. "Great God, Sue, the Mexicans are inside our walls. If they spare you, save my child." I mean, it's no longer a battle. It's about survival.
By sunrise, around 6:30 in the morning, it was all over. Every single one of the combatants inside was dead. But Santa Anna's victory came at a huge price. His army took what historians call a tremendous casualty rate. He lost hundreds of his best soldiers in just about 90 minutes.
So let's be clear. This was a total, crushing military defeat. Which begs the question, right? How in the world did this become a symbol of victory? Well, the answer is all in what happened next.
So true to his words, Santa Anna showed no mercy. He ordered that the few defenders who were captured or had surrendered be executed on the spot. Then he had the bodies of all the Texians piled up and burned. His plan? He spared a few non-combatants like Susanna Dickinson and sent them out to spread the word, to tell everyone how hopeless it was to resist him.
But that plan, it backfired. Big time. Instead of scaring everyone into submission, the news of the massacre it lit a fire under the rebellion. Men flocked to join the Texian army. And just 6 weeks later, at the Battle of San Jacinto, you know what the rallying cry was? Remember the Alamo. And in this crazy turnaround, a vengeful Texian army surprised and completely wiped out Santa Anna's forces in just 18 minutes, winning the war.
And that's when the story really began to change. Over the years, that messy, complicated reality, it got smoothed out. It got turned into this simple, heroic myth. And you can thank Hollywood for a lot of that. Movies that just focused on the bravery of guys like Davy Crockett, while kind of sweeping all the uncomfortable politics under the rug. This is really how the legend we know today was born.
And look, those movies are fun to watch, for sure. But historians are pretty clear. They are questionably accurate, and that's putting it mildly. The version we see on screen pretty much ignores the really complex stuff, especially the huge role the debate over slavery played. It flattens everything out.
So all of this leaves us with a really fascinating question to think about, doesn't it? How does a story of a brutal defeat, a defeat that came out of a rebellion where preserving slavery was, let's face it, a major issue, how does that become a nation's most famous rallying cry for victory? It's just a powerful reminder of how we choose our heroes and how the stories we tell ourselves about our past really do shape who we think we are today.